Hi, Black Girl Math fans. Thanks so much for joining this month's post. I am super excited to be joined by one of my former students and recent USC graduate who was the first Black woman from USC to graduate with a master's in biokinesiology. So, welcome, Taylor. Thanks so much for taking time to talk with me.
Hey, thanks for having me. That sounds so special.
It is. You are special. You are special. One, I've known you for such a long time. And two, just with all of your achievements that you've been able to accomplish in math and science, of course, I had to talk with you for Black Girl Math.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, tell me so, one, being the first of anything is amazing. So tell us more about your major, how you got there, what's biokinesiology?
I'll start with what it is because oftentimes when I say like what I got my graduate degree in, people are like, "Whoa, that's a long word. Like you're obviously smart." And I'm like, "It's not that deep." But how I describe biokinesiology is the science of movement or the research behind physical therapy, which often connects to a lot of people because they've had physical therapy themselves or they know somebody who's had physical therapy.
Mhm.
So it's understanding movement, human movement through like the lens of physics, biology, chemistry, and of course, math because it's in everything. So that's how I describe it in a very general sense. Very general sense. Why I decided to do it, it was kind of like I don't want to say a whim, um, but following a path of like my own curiosity. I like viewing humans as something that's calculable, even though that's like totally not true. With a little bit of math, you can try to calculate or predict some people's movement. And I had an internship um, looking at like Achilles tendon mechanics, and I was like, "Wow, this is cool. I didn't know like this was possible." So then I came home the summer after that and was like, oh snap, I have nowhere to go. Let me just check out USC and see like what's going on over there. Great lady, Dr. Susan Sigward, cool stuff going on. And went there for a summer and was like, yo, I love whatever this is. Call it biokinesiology, call it whatever you want. I'm in, count me in. So then I signed up for the program. And I mean, didn't sign up, you got to apply. It is graduate school. So applied and that's how that happened. It was very practical.
Which I mean that, and that's awesome that it, because one of the things I've known about you since I met you is that your love for math. And so how you've been able to tie that into your not only master's degree but also bachelor's degree, but it sounds like pretty much a lifelong love. So tell us how and what developed your love of math and science, and yeah, where did it get started?
Hmm. Just trying to remember like why when I was a child, like why did I like math? It might have been, I don't know if I've exactly answered that question fully myself, but I think I know at least it started with my mom trying to force me to read books, and I was like, yo, I don't like reading. Like where is this going? The story is long versus a math equation. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. That's the end of the story. And there's a sense of accomplishment with math, like once you get or at least like basic level math, because then you could go up and get into theoretical, and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was true. It's magic. But
Mhm.
nonetheless, like basic math when you're a kid, it feels good to know like you reached an answer and that's the answer. That's it. It's concrete, and it was a sense of security. Maybe looking back, is why I liked math. It made me feel good to know I could be right every time. So maybe it was more of ego and problem solving. I like being curious. I always gravitated towards math and science books, the little ones where teachers probably had them, but like I would gravitate towards them and give myself the gold star. Um, so that's where it came from, and it never went away. I still like being right. But then eventually you're not always right, and there's gray area. And sometimes zero is not zero. Maybe it's approaching infinity, and you're like, what? Um, so that's interesting. Then it reached a certain limit for me when it started to when math started to get into like differential equations and like theoretical physics in undergrad, and I was like, okay, I think I'm good. I'd like to stay with the physical measurable math. Um, so yeah, it's an ego thing for me with math, probably.
All right, so that's your why. So, and how did teachers, so what's been coming up for me this summer is in my classes all about how to support students with positive identities as mathematicians and or scientists. So what's something that your teachers did for you to help continue your love for math?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, because like you don't think about it. Like I feel like that might come up with like English, like stories about like if I'm not an immigrant, like I'm not going to relate to an immigrant story, or if an immigration story didn't touch me personally in my personal life, it didn't affect me. But like math is everywhere. And I think having teachers who gave like contextual problems, like money is everywhere. And so learning that as a kid, you're like, oh, I'm capable of doing this, and maybe I could grow up and be an accountant. Like that's where I think it starts. Is I think they call it like culturally responsive pedagogy. With my mom as an educator, so I could throw those things out there and consistently like know what that means. So I think that's where it came from. Um, and what's been affirming in math is that math isn't. It's not something that can divide people, or like, you get what I'm saying?
Tell me more. When you say divide people, what do you mean?
Like it's not biased. Math is math. It is what it is. It's not something where if you don't understand the language, like jargon and biokinesiology, like that can be something that kind of puts you off. Or it put me off sometimes where I was like in class and I didn't understand, say, biomechanics, which is like physics and math, but like calculating human movement. If it's not a contextual problem, like if we're talking about golf, I can't relate. But if we're talking about basketball and somebody like velocity or something in the basketball realm, like that is something that I'm interested in because I've seen it.
Okay.
So that's what I mean. I think that was intentional from like my elementary school, but
It
maybe
was.
that's what was. Oh yeah, it was. There's no maybe, it
As
was.
her elementary school, one of her elementary school teachers, yes. So you were, yeah, it was the premise of our school, which was culturally responsive pedagogy, as you're saying, and
Yeah,
sharing of what relates to you, what connects for you.
yeah, and it worked. It that really gets kids into STEM because once you reach out to them later on, they're like, I don't care about that. What do you mean? Oh, like, oh wait, I could do math because it helps my community. That's crazy. Um, so catching them early is, I guess, the point.
And so for you, what were some instances, or can you think of any instances of what didn't support you as you were going along this path in terms of math and science and looking at human movements and calculating it?
I think it came um, definitely later for me when I got to USC, and this is no fault to their curriculum at all. Um, but just like some of the examples, like biomechanics it's a visual like scientific thing that's like you can see biomechanics, like those little dots that they put on people for like movies, like that's something that's used in biomechanics as a tool to measure movement. And if we're using those dots to put on people and measure dancing, like I'm not particularly like drawn to ballet. I mean, like I am personally, but there's some people who do ballet research because they were a ballet dancer. But
Mhm.
like who out here is like doing, I don't know, like hip hop biomechanics? Like who's doing that? Nobody that I've seen. But that would be dope. And that would influence culture and that would influence science and bring the two together, which would be like awesome. I feel like I forgot your question though.
No, it's okay. No, you were getting into it in terms of thinking about what the relation, what connects for you in terms of the work that you're doing and also your interests. Yeah, and one of my questions was, what was something that not
Oh,
useful that, teachers or professors did that to connect with you?
yeah. There weren't any contextual like black experiences. Not that things have to be black in science. I'm trying to put it in a way where like it makes sense. But I think it takes an awareness that sometimes as a professor, teacher, somebody who's like conducting a learning process to know and be attuned to if a student is engaged with the material
Mm.
versus like you're just delivering it and they're just receiving it. And that's what was happening for me at SC. And I was like, yo, this is not it for me. But I didn't think that was something that would keep me out of the field. Absolutely not. But it's just something I can change um, if I wanted to go back into it. But we'll see what I want to do with my life. But I think that's where I was just kind of like, I'm not connecting to biokinesiology, or we call it like BKN for short. I just wasn't able to connect to it. And then eventually, like with the pandemic, this isn't really related to the content of like math and science, but in a way it is. With the pandemic, it was hard for me to focus on studies, and like my community members are dying right now. Like I cannot focus on class material if my community is dying. And I'm surrounded by people that don't get it. They don't have people and their families dying. They're not in a household with their parents who are high risk for COVID-19. And that was just, oh, sorry. It's my dog. I hope she goes away. I hope. Hold on.
Okay, I'll pause.
Okay, so I think the disconnect for me was like in elementary school, my teachers understood that I'm not just a student, like I'm a person.
Mm.
And oftentimes students come into classrooms, and if they can't take their mind off of what's happening outside of the classroom, they can't focus on what's happening inside of the classroom. And that's not a thing of like teaching, or at least I don't think so. A thing of teaching like student psychology. I just think it's a thing of being humane, and exposed to people from different cultures. Like with the pandemic, I was worried about like my Chinese classmate because she might be facing like prejudice and stuff, and hashtag stop Asian hate. I'm like, yo, is this able to focus on her project if she's consumed by what happens when she's not focused on her project? So it's I think it's that I think it's still remembering like whoever is a scientist or mathematician is also still a human, and they're still affected by like their daily lives, and that's a disconnect for me. Like if professors are like, "Oh no, sorry, that's happening. Okay, let's talk about your thesis." Like, no, I'm crying. I'm crying. There was a Zoom call where I was crying before I hopped on with one of my professors or advisors, and I was just like, "This is crazy that you're not." It's not to their fault. It's not to their fault. They just don't get it. And it's a thing of education.
And that's the difficult part, and difficult and will be the most important as we are looking at going back into schools or in person,
Right.
and making sure that we acknowledge, one, what we've all just experienced in over the year and a half, and also the very important piece is how are you connecting what's going on in the classrooms to my experiences.
Right. Because if you don't connect it, it's kind of like you're neglecting who I identify as.
Mm.
And I don't come into this room as just a like master student. I come into this room as a black woman, as like whatever history I am, experiences and all that. So if you say something in the classroom, I don't I don't know. It's not like racial things came up all the time. Like, definitely not. It had to be an intentional conversation. And the fact that it had to be intentional did angry me a little bit.
Yeah, and it's a problem because, like you said,
Yeah,
you walk into the room, you bring yourself into the room, and how is that connected for you and for other people in the room that your experiences, you matter, and who you are is also a part of what you do, a
Right.
major part.
Yeah. It doesn't reflect my technical abilities, but it impacts it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now, after some time, so you're graduated. What do you want to work on next? What's next for you?
Okay, well, since I graduated in May, I had an internship. Oh yeah, congratulations. Woo, that was fun. And it was nice because it was in person. We graduated in the Coliseum, which is something that they didn't do for like 100 years, so it felt really special. Um, so after graduation, I swear it was like 2 weeks after I started my internship because I still don't understand downtime. But started my internship as a data analyst and storyteller. So still using like math, but it was more like statistics and relationships. Working with a startup tech company. Um, so that was fun. I learned a lot about like business analytics, which is something I never had the exposure to. It's crazy to think how many iterations or different ways you can do science and math. And one of them is business, which has been interesting. And since that ended, I've been just like developing my professional network skill set, um, trying to get some free certificates because, free is awesome.
Absolutely.
And I think knowledge should be free. That's just me. Um, so yeah, that's what I've been up to. Was that question?
All right. And then what are you thinking about? So combining all of your work, your experiences, what are you thinking about for the future? What is something actually what is something that you would advise someone else, a young Black woman in math and science? What is something that you would advise them of or you would have wanted to know and that's important for them to know?
Mm. So much. I want to be thoughtful about this.
I'll give you a moment only because, and I know this is a question I threw on you.
No, it's cool. I want to make sure like I'm concise, and with intent with what I say, and not just like my personal story. Um, One, if you have a question, sis, just ask it. Because oftentimes, if you think it's a stupid question, somebody else is asking themselves that same stupid question. Or that could be something very practical, very something that you think is assumed, and then actually nobody else asked it, and then that's a whole reason for like research or a new professional endeavor. Um, that happened oftentimes in my master's like level courses, surprisingly, where I asked a question in one of our hardest classes that seemed really basic, and it's like, why didn't you come in the room knowing that and then leave the classroom, and classmates would tell me like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked that question, I was confused too. And I'm like, okay, you're welcome. So ask the question, sis. If you have the question, ask it. That's one thing. And then another thing is like, when people tell you no, it could be like yes to something else.
Hmm,
um so
I like that.
yeah, coming as like a, I think I was like a high achiever perfectionist, like always top of my class, like one of the smartest people in the classroom. And then you become an adult and it's like, what you producing, what can you do for us, as a company? And that sometimes that's a little crushing to your ego, that I've been putting in check lately. So when people tell you no, it's not a reflection of your skills, your abilities. It's not because you're Black all the time. It's not because you're a woman all the time. It's not because you're a Black woman. um, Sometimes it may just be a compatibility thing, and it's just not meant to be. So it's not a, anytime you get told no, it's not a reflection of who you are. Like, don't take
Mhm.
it personally. You can still do what you're good at, and somebody who trusts you, and trust that other people are what they say they are when they say they're a scientist or a mathematician, that they're not questioning it. That's not their realm, and what you bring to the table is of value. So when somebody tells you no, take it to another table. Take it to their competitor. I'm kidding, but um, that's something you can leverage if you want to do that. But yeah,
I'm gonna definitely walk away with ask the question, sis. That's gonna be
ask the question.
ask the question. I'm taking that one with me. You always give me some great nuggets in all the years I've known you to just
Oh,
like, I'm gonna remember that one. I'm gonna remember that one.
thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Taylor, and talking with me about your amazing, amazing graduate work and what you're doing next, and just what has been helpful for you as a Black woman student in this world of math and science, and continuing to share your amazing identity and your amazing work. So thank you.
No, thanks for having me. I hope this finds whoever it needs to find and it helps them in some capacity. So thanks for having me. This is what's up. Thanks for what you do. So